Hello everyone, Razorblade Mango here, and today I want to talk about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. I would go so far as to say is without this thing in my life, there would be no Razorblade Mango channel at all. The thing that I'm talking about today is, yes, you read that in the title correctly, Thomas the Tank Engine. More specifically, I want to talk about classic Thomas the Tank Engine, which are seasons 1 through 7. 1 through 5 is what I would consider the golden era, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, but I have soft spots for seasons 6 and 7 as well. They have a pretty frequent rotation in my house whenever I want to have classic Thomas on in the background. Thomas the Tank Engine, specifically the classic seasons, I would say they're some of the core pillars of my very early childhood that have followed me into my adult life. Because I was exposed to Thomas the Tank Engine from a very early age, so much so that I literally cannot remember the first time I ever saw it. But that doesn't really matter because what I do remember is that I was a mega fan of Thomas growing up. It was probably my first obsession as a kid, where I had to have all the toys, I had to have all the VHS tapes. I am one of those people that whenever they would bring out a new VHS tape, even if it only had one new story on it, but all the other episodes were repeats, I had to have it. I'm one of those people. And to this day, I'm still annoyed that the very rare Thomas and the Magic Railroad Magic Mountain set was something that eluded me that I still don't have to this day. I'm sure I could find it if I went on eBay, but that annoys me. I mean, when the movie came out, that was when the trailer for Thomas and the Magic Railroad came out back in 1999. I don't remember which movie I was at the theater for when I saw the trailer for it, but I went ballistic. That was the first time I'd ever gone ballistic watching a trailer of anything. And I remember I saw the movie in the theater maybe 5 or 6 times. I loved it back then. I'm almost nervous to rewatch it as an adult because I'm pretty sure I would like it significantly less compared to when I was a kid. Also, Thomas the Tank Engine is how I was introduced to famous people like Ringo Starr, George Carlin, Alec Baldwin, because they all served as narrators for the early seasons. Michael Brandon, of course, who I hold in less regard compared to those three, but that's how I was introduced to him as well as a kid. It wasn't through the Beatles that I knew about Ringo Starr, it was through Thomas the Tank Engine. It wasn't his comedy that I knew who George Carlin was, it was through Thomas the Tank Engine. It wasn't through his movies that I found out who Alec Baldwin was. It was through Thomas Tank Engine Season 5 when he started narrating it for the American dub. And one thing that I owe a great debt to Thomas Tank Engine for is it unlocked my imagination from a very early age. Is that I would like to think that a lot of my imagination that I had as a kid that has carried with me into an adulthood started with Thomas the Tank Engine, because that is my earliest memory of any kind of media, of any kind of significance to me, is early Thomas the Tank Engine. And unfortunately, like a lot of people, I fell out of it. It was probably when I was around maybe 11 or 12 that I finally stopped watching it so often because the new seasons just were, I couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time, but there was just something about the newer seasons that were coming out of the model era that I didn't really jive with, so I bailed on the show. I had no interest in watching the CGI stuff at the time. I thought it looked just abominable. And even any little brief glimpses of it that I did see, because one of my cousins, he was exposed to Thomas from an early age, but he came into it when it was the CGI era. And I remember watching it with him one time and thinking, oh god, this is just trash, this whole thing. So stopped watching it for many years. But I rediscovered my love of Classic Thomas during COVID, actually, thanks to the channel, and I've talked about his channel before, The Unlucky Tug, who is basically the unofficial brand ambassador of Classic Thomas, or I guess Thomas the Tank Engine in general, and his videos are fantastic. His videos described what I loved about Thomas as a kid in a way back then that I was too young to have any kind of critical thinking or vocabulary for, because he succinctly put into words what resonated with me about Classic Thomas. And through the adult lens now, and through the context of now that it's clicked into my mind, some little things about Thomas that I love, I think I appreciate Thomas the Tank Engine more as an adult than I did as a kid, which is quite rare in my case for certain things that I was very exposed to from an early age. And one of the things that I think is obvious if you watch those early seasons of Thomas is just how visually beautiful they are. And I think Thomas is why I have such a soft spot for model sets and little model villages. Whenever people bring out these giant displays and sets during holidays like Christmas, I love that kind of stuff. We have in my neighborhood, there is a family that lives a couple blocks from me that every year does a gigantic, unbelievable model display out of their garage. They spend months constructing this thing, and they do it every year. And every year I go there and I look at the model set, and they add something new every year that I don't really keep track of it, but it blows me away every time. And part of that love absolutely comes from Thomas the Tank Engine, because I think the model work on the classic series is second to none, especially with how they got working sets going. And it just blows me away as an adult. You see things like working water sets, weather effects, explosions, pyrotechnics, just the basic handcrafted models of all the trains and how they've evolved throughout the years. And I love learning about how these things were done back in those days, and the blood, sweat, and tears that was poured into making all these handcrafted models and sets. And I find it so fascinating. And another element of the show too that I thought was fantastic back then was the music by Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell. I think second only to Kingdom Hearts. I don't think there is any media property in my life that I am more familiar with the music for than Thomas. I think if you were to play me a track from any of those early seasons, I would be able to tell you exactly which season it's from and which episode it's from, because I watched that show religiously growing up, to the point where the imagery and the music is just burned into my memory permanently. And another thing too that I love about the show is it just has such great, fun, snappy writing. All the episodes, I couldn't believe it when I went back and looked at it, but all the episodes have such a brisk pace to them. The classic series, I think all of them were about maybe 4.5 minute episodes each, and they're almost exactly 4.5 minutes for all of them, which is crazy. And all that has to do with just the fact that the pacing is so good, the writing is so efficient and fun to listen to. I love listening to these characters just talk and bullshit with each other, especially in season 5, where a lot of the characters were really just pissy and they would just make fun of each other and have digs, and I love that kind of shit. It's so funny to me even as an adult when I watch this. It genuinely makes me laugh out loud. And another thing that I really appreciate about Classic Thomas the Tank Engine is that its themes and its morals that were, to quote the late great George Carlin, they were gently massaged into the show. And what I can't stand about a lot of other children's entertainment, even ones that I do kind of like these days, or at least I can tolerate, is that the messages in them are so blunt, they're so overt, that it's almost like they just take a hammer to the face of these children and just go, see, look, environmentalism, good, polluting, bad. Oh, look, character said a naughty thing about another character. That's bad. They need to learn their lesson about this and learn to be nice to others. No. In classic Thomas, all the lessons are just there and they don't feel the need to shout them from the rooftops. To close this video out, the thing that I love a lot too as an adult with Thomas the Tank Engine, it's just a very warm and comforting presence in my adult life. I love putting Thomas the Tank Engine on in the background when I am having a bad day, or I need just something on in the background, something nice and calming to listen to while I'm doing intense schoolwork or whatever the hell I'm doing that I'd rather not be focusing on. And when I just hear the soothing narration from whoever it is, Ringo Starr, George Carlin, Alec Baldwin, Michael Angelis, whoever, and I just hear that timeless music and I just see the visuals when I occasionally look over at my TV, and it just feels like heaven. And I don't say that lightly. My idea of some kind of absolute peace would be if I could live in the world of Thomas the Tank Engine. And I've thought about this before many times when I was a kid or when I was an adult. And that's maybe why I connect so strongly with things like Kingdom Hearts, with cities like Traverse Town and Twilight Town, is because they remind me so much of those old, nostalgic, warm, comforting sets from Thomas the Tank Engine. And Thomas the Tank Engine simply just makes me feel like a better person when I put it on. It was there for me during a time during my childhood where, even during the not so happy times, Thomas the Tank Engine was always a warm, consistent presence during that time. And it's still that way now as an adult. And I really didn't think I would ever rediscover my love for Thomas the Tank Engine as much as I have now. But when I finally have kids of my own, there's nothing that would bring me greater happiness in my life, or very few things would bring me greater happiness than a day coming where I would be able to introduce my kid or kids to Thomas the Tank Engine, and for them to get the same kind of warm, happy feeling from it that I experienced when I was a kid. If you've never watched Classic Thomas, a lot of the episodes are available for free on YouTube in really great HD quality. So, I don't know. Go check out The Unlucky Tug. I think his channel is great. I'll put another link for it in the description, but I loved Classic Thomas the Tank Engine. I used to feel embarrassment and shame for saying that, but now as a 30-plus-year-old adult, I don't. I feel a genuine sense of pride that I grew up when Thomas was at its peak, and I'm grateful to what it's brought to me in the past and what it brings to me in my current adult life.